John McKinsey. He's a partner with Stoel Rives, a law firm that is very active in the renewable energy space. John, good to see you.
Good to see you.
You're here in California, and everyone wants to know what is going to happen in California with Proposition 23 after the November elections, what's going to happen with the 33% renewable energy standard here. A lot of political turmoil at the moment in California. Everyone watching what's going on in the state, given that it's a leader in geothermal, and asking, how's this going to affect business? So what do you see happening after November with Proposition 23? How might that change the landscape here?
The November 2nd elections not only have Proposition 23, which would stop the Global Warming Solutions Act for quite a period of time, and in fact essentially permanently. There's also a governor's race in which the governor's candidates are running on the same criteria. They have different positions on what should be California's role in fighting the war on global warming. And as a result, there's several referendums that are occurring, and they're almost acting as a litmus test for what California is going to treat seriously. But what's really interesting is this topic on global warming has replaced the discussion around renewable energy to somewhat. Even though the renewable portfolio standards were around before we had the Global Warming Solutions Act, that's now become the main driver. And a lot of people are acting as if we don't have global warming and a fight on global warming in California, then the whole focus on renewable energy would go away. And the ultimate example of that is this 33% renewable energy standard, which is essentially a renewable portfolio standard, which is the main driver for that is the Global Warming Solutions Act, but it's a very different standard. And what the elections in November could do is either say that what we're doing in California is exactly what we should keep doing, or we've gone off track and we need to just get back to focusing on renewable energy at a much more moderate pace. And so there's a lot at stake, but it could, there's things that's going to happen after the election as well.
And so what other things will happen after the election? I mean, really evaluating the requirements under this renewable energy standard. This is a much different renewable energy standard than is in place in other states. Given that it applies to all utilities, the Air Resources Board is involved in the mandate. How does that impact how that's integrated in California?
Well, that's very true. The new standard, this 33% renewable energy standard, is breathtakingly new and fresh, and that it actually has teeth, and so that unlike almost every renewable portfolio standard I can think of, including California's, where the Utility Commission was focused on economic regulation, this standard is focused on environmental regulation, and so if you don't comply with it, they can fine and penalize the utilities. So it's a big, bold step, and if the November 2nd election brings either Proposition 23 passing, which is would be a voter mandate to say stop, or if
until unemployment levels reach a certain percentage, is that correct?
That's correct, except the requirement is that unemployment levels reach 5% or below and be dropping for 5 consecutive quarters. That's never occurred, as far as I'm aware, in the history of California. So many people think if it's passed, it's the end of the Global Warming Solutions Act.
Do you think that's the case?
Looking at it, I think so. I think that's correct. Now, Meg Whitman, the Republican candidate for governor, has indicated that she would invoke a provision in the Global Warming Solutions Act which would allow her, it's the same 5% rule, but it allows her to make that decision on a quarterly basis. So if she's elected, she would clearly suspend the enforcement of the Global Warming Solutions Act, but it might not be permanent. Even if the election comes and goes and Proposition 23 fails and we now have a Governor Brown instead of a Governor Whitman, several attorney generals in other states have said they're going to sue California over a violation of the Commerce Clause and discriminating against in-state and out-of-state customers. And the utilities are quite probably likely to sue as well. And then in the meanwhile, the California Senate and the legislature as a whole is not very happy at all that the Air Resources Board went off and adopted a portfolio standard under the Global Warming Solutions Act when they really think it needs to be a legislative mandate. And so they're quite likely in the spring to start a new legislative effort to replace what we have now. So there's many more events that are going to occur even if it survives this. But if it doesn't survive this, then I think we're going to see a return to a focus on practical economic development of renewable energy and not the all-out thrust that we're seeing right now, which a 33% requirement would require.
You've just proved how complicated this industry is, especially in the United States, which is extremely scattered, state by state, service territory by service territory. In the geothermal sector, are companies sophisticated enough to really navigate this space? I mean, the industry is much older than other sectors, going on 50 years, but still very complicated. A lot of these businesses, do they have the sophistication to navigate that very complicated environment?
The geothermal industry does much better compared to solar or wind, particularly because you have to be a fairly large company to develop geothermal assets, so they're already going to have more resources. And then secondly, they're made up mostly of people that have been in the utility industry even longer than they've been in the geothermal industry. So they understand power, and they look like a traditional power source, base load, dispatchable generation. And as a result, they're really well set up to weather this storm regardless of that outcome. Geothermal energy is such a highly valued renewable energy source that it doesn't need a 33% RPS or renewable energy standard to get more power purchase agreements. So to some extent, they can watch what's going on from a distance and feel concern for their brethren in wind or solar, but for the most part be comfortable that what they're doing is going to continue. And they're more interested in things like the ARRA and whether that's going to expire if they're trying to meet some deadline by December 31st.
Right. So that deadline is very important. Companies have to get construction activities underway before the end of the year to qualify for the Treasury grant. Are companies scrambling right now?
Every week they scramble more and more and more. It's the middle of October, and they're getting really nervous because if they don't have permits yet, they have to make decisions about whether to commit funds before the end of the year in a way that qualifies them under a 5% rule, but have those funds be at risk, because if they don't get their permit or they don't get a permit they can build with in January, February, March, April, then they will have lost that money. And the way it's set up, they really do have to spend the money in a way that it's committed to the project.
And do you think that the stimulus package, the Treasury grant program in particular, will be extended? Is it hard to say?
It is very hard to say. I think nobody really knows what's going to happen in the legislative period on the Hill in November, December after the election. There's certainly a chance. It's a discussion, and there's going to be an effort to extend it, and the question will be whether that effort can succeed or not.
But still, a lot of geothermal companies, I think 95% of projects I've heard in development in the last year and a half have taken advantage of stimulus funds. So very important for the health of the industry right now.
It is. It's very, very important, and that is demonstrated by the rush to try to achieve this deadline. That being said, even if it's not extended, the real problem that the renewable industry has had for a decade perhaps or more has been this come and go. Now we have this incentive, now we have that one, and the windows are so short and small that they have to rush to try to meet one program and then they scramble to meet another, and overall it's not very good energy policy.
And particularly bad for geothermal given the long project cycle times.
Right, exactly. From the conception of a project to actually pulling steam out of the ground, a decade can go by.
Any thoughts about 2011? We saw less megawatts installed in 2010 than in 2009, but as the GEA has pointed out, over 500 megawatts in later stages of development if these companies can secure financing. What do you think is going to happen in 2011? Will a lot of those projects get developed?
They will, though you really won't see the megawatts in 2011 either, or you might see some, but again, that long development cycle means we'll be able to say there are now more holes being drilled, there are now more wells that are ready to go while plants are being built, but I think we'll see a bigger effect of that in terms of megawatts reaching the grid in 2012.
Well, John McKinsey, thanks very much for speaking to us.
Glad to be here.